Hello, and welcome back to the History of the Mongols. I'm your host, Kyle. In popular modern histories and general surveys, the Mongol withdrawal from Europe in 1242 is often portrayed as a mysterious vanishing act, as though the Mongols simply faded back into the eastern steppes, forgotten by the Europeans they had so recently terrorised. But the reality was far more complex. In the immediate aftermath of the Mongol departure, European rulers and religious leaders were desperate to understand the nature of this formidable new threat. Far from being erased from European memory, the Mongols became the subject of intense diplomatic efforts. Kings, popes, and religious orders dispatched envoys eastward, even as far as Mongolia itself, to gather intelligence, negotiate, and assess the Mongol threat. Some of these envoys recorded detailed accounts of their journeys, providing historians today with invaluable perspectives on life and politics within the Mongol Empire. In this episode, we will examine three such accounts from the 1240s and 1250s, those of John of Plano Carpini, Simon of St. Quentin, and William of Rubruck. The first of these journeys is that of John of Plano Carpini, also known as Giovanni da Pian del Carpini. Like the other travellers discussed today, Carpini was a member of a Catholic religious order, in his case, the Franciscans. Founded by St. Francis of Assisi in the early 13th century, the Franciscans were known for their commitment to poverty, their simple brown robes, and their close relationship with the Catholic Church in Rome. John of Plano Carpini was a prominent figure within the order, having played a key role in expanding Franciscan influence into the German-speaking world. The impetus for Carpini's mission came from the highest authority in the Catholic world, Pope Innocent IV. In 1245, the Pope convened the First Council of Lyons, one of the major ecclesiastical gatherings of the High Middle Ages, where church leaders debated theological matters and how to respond to pressing political threats. At this council, two major concerns dominated the agenda: the challenge posed by Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II Hohenstaufen and the growing menace of the Mongols. While Innocent's primary concern remained Frederick, the recent devastation inflicted by the Mongols in Hungary could not be ignored. Determined to learn more about the Mongols and, ideally, establish diplomatic contact that might prevent further invasions, Pope Innocent dispatched the 65-year-old John of Plano Carpini on a bold mission to the east in late 1245. With assistance from European leaders such as the King of Bohemia and the High Duke of Poland, Carpini made his way eastward, eventually reaching the court of Prince Vasilko of Volhynia. Vasilko and his brother, Daniel of Galicia, ruled the westernmost Rus principalities and had largely escaped the destruction that had befallen their neighbours. From Vasilko, Carpini obtained the most current intelligence on the Mongols available to any European at the time. As Carpini's party travelled further, they passed the ruins of Kiev, a stark reminder of the Mongols' destructive power, and through a depopulated countryside. It was only upon reaching Kaniv that they entered territory under direct Mongol rule. Yet, as envoys of the ruler the Mongols referred to as the Great Pope, Carpini and his small delegation were granted safe conduct and access to the famed YAM system, the vast Mongol relay network that enabled rapid communication and travel across the empire. Once John of Plano Carpini and his party reached the Mongol YAM relay system, their pace accelerated dramatically. Riding day and night across the vast Eurasian steppe, they changed horses 3 to 4 times daily at the YAM stations, covering remarkable distances in short time. By April 4th, 1246, they reached the encampment of Batu. After the European invasion, Batu had chosen not to return to Mongolia, instead establishing his base along the fertile grasslands of the Volga River, the heart of his western domain. From here, Batu exercised considerable authority. Carpini observed that Batu now resided in the elaborate linen tents, once belonging to King Bela IV of Hungary, seized as spoils after the Mongol victory at the Battle of Mohi. At Batu's camp, the Pope's letters were translated into Russian, Persian, and Mongolian to ensure they could be properly understood. Without delay, Carpini and his party were sent further east. This leg of the journey was grueling. They rode relentlessly, often subsisting on nothing more than millet, mixed with water and salt, or surviving on melted snow. Along the way, they passed the desolate ruins of the Khwarezmian Empire, cities once thriving, now reduced to rubble. Their names lost to Carpini, who had no time to inquire before being ushered onward. By July 1246, the delegation reached Mongolia. The urgency of their arduous ride had a clear purpose. Carpini arrived just in time for the election of a new great Khan, Guyuk, son of Ögedei. As representatives of the Pope, they were treated with courtesy, provided with their own tent and adequate supplies. Carpini's account of the enthronement ceremony is rich with detail. The proceedings were briefly interrupted by a sudden hailstorm, which postponed Guyuk's formal elevation until August 24th. Attendees represented an astonishing array of distant realms: Prince Yaroslav of Suzdal from the Rus, emissaries from China and Korea, nobles from the Kingdom of Georgia, and even an ambassador from the Caliph of Baghdad were among those gathered to witness the event. Despite their proximity to Guyuk, Carpini and his fellow envoys had limited direct interaction with the new Great Khan. Carpini's brief description of Guyuk portrays a ruler of striking intellect and seriousness. The present emperor may be 40 or 45 years old or more. He is of medium height, very intelligent and extremely shrewd, and most serious and grave in his manner. He is never seen to laugh for a slight cause nor to indulge in any frivolity, so we were told by the Christians who are constantly with him. Regarding Guyuk's religious leanings, Carpini relays widespread rumours that the Great Khan was on the verge of embracing Christianity. Guyuk certainly demonstrated sympathy toward the faith. Several of his closest advisors were Nestorian Christians, but no such conversion took place. As for the diplomatic mission itself, its results were disappointing for the Europeans. Guyuk dismissed Carpini's entreaties, offering instead a blunt justification for the devastation inflicted on Hungary and Poland. He argued that these conquests were the consequence of Europe's refusal to submit to heaven's will, as manifested through Mongol authority. Worse still, Guyuk made it clear that the Mongol onslaught was far from over. By the time Carpini departed Guyuk's camp in November 1246, he carried with him a sobering conclusion. The Mongol Empire had no intention of peacefully coexisting with Europe, and under Guyuk's rule, further military campaigns against the West seemed not only possible, but inevitable. With the looming threat of another Mongol invasion, Carpini shaped his account not as mere travel writing, but as a practical guide for Europe's survival. His work presents one of the earliest systematic studies of the Mongols, combining detailed descriptions of their physical appearance, culture, military organisation, and strategy with concrete recommendations for how they could be resisted. Carpini emphasised that European armies needed to fundamentally reform themselves along Mongol lines. He argued for adopting the Mongols' strict discipline, including harsh punishments for desertion and failure to advance, and called for the implementation of the decimal military structure, dividing forces into units of tens, hundreds, thousands, and 10,000s. He stressed the critical role of crossbowmen, warned of the Mongols' signature feigned retreats, and advised maintaining reserve forces to support the line. Continuous scouting to monitor enemy movements was essential, and if defenders chose to rely on fortifications, these needed to be constructed in locations inaccessible to siege engines. Furthermore, Carpini highlighted the importance of carefully interrogating captured prisoners, noting that many of the Mongol forces were drawn from subject peoples who, if given the opportunity, might turn against their Mongol overlords. Yet, for all his sharp observational skills, Carpini occasionally drifted into the realm of myth and rumour, especially when describing regions he had not personally visited. In his account, he claims that the Mongols held sway over literal monsters, that Christianity and the Gospels were honoured in China, despite his never setting foot there, and that the legendary Christian monarch Prester John had repelled a Mongol invasion of Greater India. Nonetheless, his account of Mongol internal politics at the start of Guyuk Khan's reign is considered remarkably accurate. He lists the empire's most influential chiefs and makes special mention of Mungke, future Great Khan, and his formidable mother, Sokak Tani Beki, describing her as, "Among the Tartars, this lady is the most renowned, with the exception of the emperor's mother, Turegen, and more powerful than anyone else except Batu." On his return journey, Carpini visited again with Prince Vasilko of Volhynia and his brother Daniel of Galicia. Both rulers, recognizing the growing Mongol threat, entrusted Carpini with letters and envoys to Pope Innocent IV, seeking support and cooperation. This effort culminated in Pope Innocent crowning Daniel as King of Ruthenia, Galicia Volhynia, briefly raising hopes for Orthodox Catholic unity. However, beyond the symbolic gesture, the Pope offered no tangible military or political support. By the end of the 1250s, Daniel's independence was crushed in a major Mongol assault. Carpini's written account, completed upon his return to Europe, circulated widely thanks to his own efforts, and its inclusion in Vincent of Beauvais' Speculum Historiale, one of the most popular medieval encyclopedias. Its clear observational descriptions of the Mongols made it an essential source for later European travellers and chroniclers. Some scholars even argue that Carpini's report marked an early step toward more empirical, analytical approaches to geography and ethnography, offering one of the first detailed European presentations of the world beyond Christendom. But if Carpini's work expanded Europe's intellectual horizons, it also served as a grim warning. He returned bearing a letter from Guyuk Khan, a blunt demand for the submission of the Pope, and all European monarchs, delivered with an explicit threat of devastation should they refuse. Far from fading into the background, the Mongol Empire remained a dangerous and immediate reality for Europe. As John of Plano Carpini made his return from the Mongol Empire in 1247, a second European mission was already en route to engage with the Mongols in the Caucasus. Concerned that Carpini might not survive the journey or succeed in his mission, Pope Innocent IV had dispatched an additional embassy, this time composed of Dominican friars based in the Crusader states. Like the Franciscans, the Dominicans were a relatively new mendicant order, founded in the early 13th century, and known for their commitment to preaching, scholarship, and, increasingly, their involvement as papal emissaries and inquisitors. Their distinctive black cloaks worn over white habits made them easily recognizable. The Dominican delegation was led by Friar Aslin, though it was another member of the group, Friar Simon of St. Quentin, who later recorded the events of their mission. On May 24, 1247, the Dominican envoys arrived at the camp of Baiju Noyan, the Mongol commander overseeing the Caucasus region. Their arrival marked the beginning of a fraught diplomatic encounter. When Baiju's representative approached to inquire about their purpose, things quickly deteriorated. Asked whose envoys they were, Friar Aslin boldly declared, "I am the envoy of the Lord Pope, who among Christians is regarded as superior to all men, and to whom they show reverence as to a father and lord." This statement deeply irritated Baiju's representative, who retorted, "How can you speak with such arrogance, claiming your Lord Pope to be the greatest of all men? Do you not know that the Khan is the Son of God, and that Baiju Noyan and Batu are his princes, whose names are exalted across the world?" To this, Friar Aslin bluntly replied that the Pope knew none of these names, and that they had been instructed simply to locate the nearest Mongol army, wherever it might be, and deliver a letter urging an end to the slaughter of Christians. The exchange set the tone for the remainder of the meeting. Baiju's representative returned to his commander, reappearing shortly after in a new set of robes, and asked what gifts the Pope had sent for Baiju. The Dominicans, however, had brought nothing, explaining that in fact it was customary for others to send gifts to the Pope, not the reverse. The representative left once more, only to return again, now dressed in yet another change of clothes, this time openly scolding the envoys for arriving without gifts. He then asked whether they led any European armies advancing towards Syria. The implication was clear. The Mongols wanted to gauge whether these friars posed a threat or represented the vanguard of a military campaign. Before the Dominicans could meet Baiju in person, they were ordered to perform a ritual act of submission, to genuflect before him. The friars refused, fearing this would constitute idolatry. One member of their party, familiar with Mongol customs, clarified that this gesture was not religious worship, but rather a political act, signalling the submission of the Pope and the Catholic Church to the authority of the Khan. Even so, the Dominicans held firm. They declared that they would sooner face execution than imply the subordination of the Church. They added, with biting sarcasm, that they would gladly genuflect, even kiss the soles of Baiju's feet, if only he first converted to Christianity. Unsurprisingly, this bold defiance did little to improve relations with the Mongols. The Mongol response to the Dominican envoys was swift and brutal in tone. You advise us to become Christians and be dogs like you. Is your Pope not a dog? Are all Christians not dogs? The Mongols jeered at the friars. Upon hearing of this exchange, Baiju, the Mongol commander in the Caucasus, ordered the immediate execution of the entire delegation. Cooler heads among his advisors intervened. One suggested sparing 2 of the 4 friars as a gesture of pragmatism. Another, more macabre, proposed skinning the lead friar and sending his corpse, stuffed with straw, back to Rome. Yet another suggested forcing the friars to stand at the front lines of a siege, where they would almost certainly be killed by enemy missiles. Ultimately, it was one of Baiju's wives who dissuaded him from rash action, reminding him that killing envoys, even hostile ones, violated diplomatic protocol and would invite disapproval from the imperial court. Though spared from execution, the friars' situation remained tense. The Mongols remained baffled by the Christians' refusal to show deference to Baiju. From the Mongol perspective, Christians worshipped wooden crosses and stone churches. Why then could they not show similar respect to Baiju, chosen by the Great Khan, who in turn ruled by heaven's mandate? The friars' explanations, which invoked theology, the authority of St. Peter, and the spiritual primacy of the Pope, were lost in translation, literally and figuratively. The debate went in circles, and it was eventually decided that Friar Aslin would submit the Pope's letter to Baiju, but would not appear before him personally. Even the delivery of the letter was a laborious process. Aslin had to explain its contents word by word to a Greek and a Turk, who translated it into Persian, which was then rendered into Mongolian for Baiju to hear. Baiju's patience for diplomatic formalities quickly evaporated. The friars were left waiting in the blazing sun, their provisions reduced to minimal bread and water. Initially, they were told they could depart on June 12, 1247, but this permission was rescinded when news arrived that El-Jigide, a trusted ally of Great Khan Guyuk, was approaching to assume command in the region. El-Jigide's arrival signalled a renewed military focus in the west, yet it also delayed the friars' departure. Weeks dragged on, and with no sign of movement, Friar Aslin eventually persuaded one of Baiju's councillors to plead their case, sweetening the request with the promise of gifts. Baiju relented and drafted a letter to the Pope. But just as the friars prepared to leave, El-Jigide finally arrived. What followed were 7 days of feasting, drinking, and celebrations in honour of the new commander. Only after this extended welcome concluded, some 9 weeks after their initial arrival, were the friars finally permitted to depart Baiju's camp on July 25, 1247. Like John of Plano Carpini, Friar Aslin returned from his mission to the Mongols with a message, but this one came not from the Great Khan himself but from Baiju. The letter was blunt and uncompromising. The Pope, Baiju declared, was expected to present himself in person and submit to Mongol authority. Refusal to do so would mark him, and all of Europe, as enemies of the Mongol Empire, and the Mongols reserved only one fate for their enemies. By the close of the 1240s, Pope Innocent IV had received not 1 but 2 letters from prominent Mongol leaders, including Great Khan Guyuk himself, demanding submission. These letters leave little room for doubt. The Mongol High Command viewed the subjugation of Europe as both inevitable and imminent. Despite the failure of these missions to convert the Mongols or negotiate peace, they provided Europe with invaluable intelligence. Friar Simon of St. Quentin, a companion of Aslin, documented extensive information on the Mongols, their customs, military organisation and tactics, gathered from first-hand sources in the Caucasus, Iran and Anatolia. These missions were, at their core, reconnaissance operations cloaked in the language of diplomacy and faith. The picture that emerged in Europe over the course of the 1240s was stark. The Mongol Empire was not simply another distant, exotic polity. It was a unified, expansionist, military juggernaut, bent on world domination. Our final traveller for today is William of Rubruck, a Franciscan friar whose journey to the Mongol Empire offers one of the most detailed and perceptive European accounts of the Mongols. Unlike his predecessors, Rubruck insisted he was not a diplomat, merely a humble friar carrying a letter from King Louis IX of France for a friend. Rubruck's expedition differed significantly from earlier missions in both its motivations and its circumstances. There is no evidence he ever met John of Plano Carpini, though he was clearly familiar with his work, albeit not enough to consistently get his name right. referring to him in his own writings as John of Policarpo. We know little of Rubruck's personal background, except from his own wry admission that he was a man of considerable size. In the early 1250s, Rubruck was stationed in the Holy Land, where he came into the orbit of King Louis IX. In the winter of 1248, he accompanied the crusading French king to Cyprus, and then to Egypt, in 1250 for the Seventh Crusade, a military disaster that contributed to the Mamluk seizure of power in Egypt, a shift with major implications for the Mongol world. Rubruck's own writings suggest he did not accompany the king during the disastrous Nile campaign that saw Louis captured and ransomed by the Mamluks. In the aftermath, Louis retreated to Palestine, chastened but determined, focusing on rebuilding fortifications and shoring up his position in the Levant. During this period, Rubruck became a trusted figure at the French royal court. Louis's diplomatic contacts with the Mongols predated Rubruck's mission. In the 1240s, he had dispatched the Dominican friar Andrew of Longjumeau to the court of the Great Khan. However, the timing proved unfortunate. By the time Andrew reached Mongolia, Guyuk Khan was dead, and Elgigide, a Mongol commander and close ally of Guyuk, soon fell victim to Munka Khan's consolidation of power. As a devout Franciscan, Rubruck was eager to spread Christianity among the heathens, and had learned from Andrew of Longjumeau's report that German miners, enslaved by the Mongols during their invasion of Hungary, had been carried east by Chagatai Prince Buri. Moved by their plight and driven by missionary zeal, Rubruck took it upon himself to travel to the Mongol Empire in 1253. Though his mission was self-directed, King Louis provided him with a letter for the Khan, more a formality than an official embassy. Learning that Sartak, the son of Batu, and a powerful Jochid prince, was rumoured to be a Christian, Rubruck decided to first seek him out, hoping to gain his assistance for the arduous journey east. Departing from Jaffa likely in the early months of 1253, Rubruck travelled north to Constantinople. There he preached in the great church of Hagia Sophia and spoke with men who had previously journeyed to the Mongol court. He also gained a companion, another Franciscan, Bartholomew of Cremona. From Constantinople, they sailed across the Black Sea to the Crimean Peninsula. From there, they began their long trek northward into the vast Eurasian steppe, bound for the court of Sartak and into the heart of the Mongol world. Rubruck's first encounter with Sartak proved to be a major disappointment. Though Sartak was rumoured in Europe to be a Christian, Rubruck quickly found those claims exaggerated. In fact, Sartak's own secretaries firmly corrected him when he referred to their master as a Christian, stating plainly, "Do not say that our master is a Christian. He is not a Christian. He is a Mongol." The customary gift-giving ceremony that followed did not improve Rubruck's opinion of the visit. Many of his belongings were taken or stolen outright under the guise of protocol. During the 4 days they stayed at Sartak's camp, they were not even provided with proper food, surviving only on airag fermented mare's milk. Despite the dire circumstances, Rubruck admitted that he developed a taste for the drink. Rubruck emphasised that he was not an official envoy, but merely carried a letter of goodwill from King Louis IX of France. This, however, created diplomatic confusion. As historian Peter Jackson notes in his translation of Rubruck's account, the Mongols were in fact unable to comprehend why representatives of independent peoples should trouble to visit the imperial court if not to bring submission. Sartak, unable to make sense of Rubruck's ambiguous status, decided the matter required the judgment of his father, Batu. Thus Rubruck, by now in his mid-40s and adhering to the Franciscan tradition of travelling barefoot, was sent across the vast Volga steppe to Batu's camp, retracing the route of his predecessor, John of Plano Carpini. Upon arrival, Rubruck was astounded by the sheer scale of Batu's encampment, which he compared to a large city in its size and bustle. He was brought before Batu's tent, where he beheld the second most powerful figure in the Mongol Empire. Seated on a golden throne beside his wife, Batu regarded Rubruck with a sharp, penetrating gaze. Rubruck provides what is considered our only surviving physical description of Batu. He regarded us with a keen gaze, as we did him. He struck me as being of the same build as the Lord John of Beaumont, and his face was covered at this time with reddish blotches. Unfortunately for historians, the precise build of John of Beaumont remains unknown, leaving us with a frustratingly incomplete image. Through an interpreter, Rubruck addressed Batu and his court, urging the Khan to convert to Christianity. Batu, amused, offered a faint smile as the court burst into laughter at the suggestion. Batu proceeded to interrogate Rubruck, having already learned from his spies of King Louis's recent military expedition to Egypt. Rubruck explained that the campaign's purpose was to recapture Jerusalem. After hearing his explanation, Batu offered the customary airag and dismissed him to the side. Unwilling to leave Rubruck's ambiguous mission unresolved, Batu decided to send him directly to the ultimate authority, Mongol Khan himself, regardless of Rubruck's consent or comfort. There is no counting the times we were famished, thirsty, frozen, and exhausted, Rubruck later wrote, describing the grueling winter journey of 1253 across Central Asia to the Mongol heartland. Rubruck's account differs from that of his predecessor, Plano Carpini, in that it is far more personal and opinionated, often dominated by his deep dislike for the hardships of the journey and his critical assessments of Mongol customs. Their hygiene and personal habits, particularly relieving themselves openly on the steppe near him, he found, in his own words, excessively tiresome. By December 1253, William of Rubruck had arrived at the camp of Mongol Khan, located roughly 10 days' journey from the imperial capital of Karakorum. Unlike previous envoys such as Friar Aslin, Rubruck was shown a degree of courtesy. Before his audience with the Khan, he was asked whether he wished to pay homage according to European custom or Mongolian tradition. Rubruck proposed to first offer praises to God, then follow the Khan's wishes. The meeting took place inside a tent lavishly adorned with gold. Rubruck offers one of the few surviving physical descriptions of Mongol Khan. Seated on a golden couch beside one of his wives, Mongol was dressed in spotted fur. Rubruck describes him as snub-nosed, of medium build, and approximately 45 years old. One of Mongol's daughters sat on the steps before him, whom Rubruck rather bluntly and ungenerously described as very ugly. The initial exchange did not progress far. Alcohol was served, and unfortunately for Rubruck, his interpreter overindulged. After Mongol made a grand statement, "Just as the sun spreads its rays in all directions, so my power and that of Batu are spread to every quarter." The translator, now drunk, was unable to convey the message. The meeting ended abruptly, with Rubruck ushered to the side. Rubruck's time at the Mongol court was far from pleasant. Though provided with food and lodging, he endured frequent interrogations and, by his own account, mistreatment. The Mongols were eager to learn about Europe, its geography, resources, population, and peculiar details such as whether the Pope was truly 500 years old. Rubruck's mission, driven by his Franciscan faith, aimed to convert the heathens and offer spiritual aid to the German miners taken as captives during the Mongol invasions. His efforts, however, met with little success. He managed to convert only 6 individuals, and the German captives were located deep within Central Asia, well beyond his reach. Rubruck found himself isolated among Nestorian and Greek Orthodox Christians at court, whom he regarded with suspicion and disdain, believing they were motivated more by personal gain than genuine faith. Many of these priests were convinced that Mongol Khan was on the verge of converting to Christianity, but Rubruck saw through the illusion. Mongol showed little genuine interest in any single religion, preferring to keep clerics of all faiths close, content to receive their prayers without favouring any of them. During his months at Mongol's encampment and in Karakorum itself, Rubruck encountered people from all over Eurasia. Ambassadors from the Nicene Empire, the Delhi Sultanate, Baghdad, and China mingled with Europeans captured during the Mongol conquests. Rubruck met Hungarians, Germans, Russians, and Frenchmen, including a fellow Parisian, William Bouchier, a goldsmith highly valued by the Mongols. Bouchier's most famous creation was the legendary silver tree of Karakorum, a literal tree crafted entirely from silver, designed with elaborate conduits running through its branches and trunk. At the base of the tree stood 4 silver lions, from whose mouths flowed airag fermented mare's milk. Higher up, silver snakes coiled around the branches, their gilded mouths pouring grape wine, karakumis, refined mare's milk, bale, a honey-based liquor, and rice wine. At the pinnacle of the tree stood a silver angel, holding a trumpet. At the Khan's command, a man hidden inside the tree would sound the trumpet, signalling stewards in an adjoining room to fill the conduits with the various beverages. As the drinks emerged from the lions and snakes, they were collected in vessels and served to the assembled guests, who applauded the spectacle. Despite the grandeur of the silver tree and the Khan's palace, Rubruck found Karakorum itself unimpressive. He compared the imperial capital to a modest French market town, albeit one with an extraordinarily diverse population drawn from every corner of the Mongol Empire. During his time at the Mongol court, William of Rubruck experienced a series of episodes that reflect both the cultural tensions and occasional absurdities of his mission. In one notable incident, Rubruck joined forces with a Nestorian Christian priest to attempt to heal one of Mongol Khan's ailing wives. Their treatment consisted of a concoction made from rhubarb and holy water, a curious blend of medieval medicine and religious ritual, which reportedly offered little benefit. The most significant episode from Rubruck's account, however, was a formal religious debate held in the Mongol capital of Karakorum. The debate arose after friction between Rubruck and Buddhist monks, whom he openly disdained, despite providing a generally accurate description of their religious practices. Rather than suppressing the dispute, the Mongols turned it into a grand, public theological contest. On one side were the Catholic representatives, led by Rubruck and joined by Nestorian and Greek Orthodox Christians as well as Muslims. On the other side stood the Buddhist lamas. The debate was overseen by 3 appointed judges, 1 Buddhist, 1 Christian, and 1 Muslim. Mongol Khan, in his typical pragmatic manner, insisted that the debate be conducted with respect, forbidding insults or personal attacks on pain of death. Rubruck's version of the event, the only surviving account, portrays him as the intellectual victor, claiming he dismantled the Buddhist arguments with ease, while his allies contributed little to the defence of Christianity. He does admit, however, that his brilliant performance failed to convert a single listener, and the debate concluded in typically Mongol fashion, with copious drinking and loud, off-key singing, much of it coming from his own religious faction. Perhaps the most revealing moment of Rubruck's stay came during a brief conversation with Mongol Khan, mediated through an interpreter. In this exchange, Mongol offered a succinct explanation of the Mongol approach to religion, one that reflected both their tolerance and their deeply pragmatic worldview. We Mongols believe that there is only one God, through whom we live, and through whom we die, and to him we direct our hearts. But just as God has given the hand many fingers, so he has given mankind many paths. To you God has given the scriptures, yet you Christians do not follow them. Nowhere in the scriptures does it say that one man should insult another, does it? Nowhere does it say that a man should abandon the path of justice for profit. So then, God has given you the scriptures, and you do not follow them. But to us, he has given soothsayers, and we obey them, and we live in peace. Mongol's words capture the essence of the Mongol religious outlook, a worldview that valued order and stability above theological uniformity, and one that, to Rubruck's frustration, made the Mongols resistant to conversion, but open to coexistence with many faiths, so long as their authority remained unchallenged. Following his long and arduous journey, William of Rubruck was instructed to return west with a letter from Mongol Khan addressed to King Louis IX of France. Rubruck expressed deep regret that he had not been able to fulfill his goal of converting the great Khan to Christianity. Mongol's letter, preserved in Rubruck's account, is striking for its comparatively diplomatic tone, at least by Mongol standards, especially when compared to the harsh demands issued by Guyuk Khan in earlier years. To be clear, Mongol still expected the kings of Europe to submit to him, and warned against relying on geographical distance or natural barriers like mountains to ensure their safety. Yet, the letter also contained something resembling an apology, or at least an explanation, for the confusing and contradictory messages delivered by the Mongol envoys of Elgi Gide, as well as the failed mission of Andrew of Longjumeau, who had mistakenly travelled not to Guyuk Khan, but to his widow, Oghul Kaimish. Mongol's disdain for Oghul Kaimish is made glaringly obvious in the letter. His words are shockingly blunt for official correspondence between rulers. As for knowing the business of war and the affairs of peace, subduing the wide world and discerning how to act for the best, what could that woman, so lacking in worth, have known of this? That Munka would so openly insult her in a diplomatic letter speaks volumes about the hostility he felt toward the Ugadide line and helps to explain the ruthlessness with which he later crushed their political influence. Unfortunately for Rubruck, but fortunately for historians, he never managed to deliver the letter to King Louis in person. Upon reaching the court of Batu along the Volga, Rubruck learned that Louis had already returned to France from the Crusader states. Rather than continuing on, his Franciscan superiors instructed him to remain in Acre. There, he sent Munka's letter to France, along with his own written account of his experiences, an account that has become one of the most valuable European sources on the Mongol Empire. Unlike John of Plano Carpini's earlier report, which focused heavily on the Mongols' military capabilities and tactics, Rubruck's account is much more concerned with the customs, social structures, and cultures he encountered. His observations are often sharp, occasionally tinged with condescension, but undeniably detailed. Rubruck also offered one of the most comprehensive geographical surveys produced by a European in the Middle Ages. He corrected long-standing misconceptions from ancient sources, such as clarifying that the Caspian Sea is a lake, not an ocean, accurately tracing the courses of the Don and Volga rivers, and recognizing that the Chinese were the same people the Greeks had referred to as the Seres in antiquity. His linguistic observations were equally astute, noting connections between various languages and ethnic groups across Eurasia. Notably, Rubruck also dismissed many of the fantastical medieval myths regarding distant lands. Contrary to popular belief, he found no evidence of monstrous races like the dog-headed people, and he explicitly argued against their existence based on his travels. One of the few individuals to engage seriously with Rubruck's account during the 13th century was the English Franciscan scholar Roger Bacon. The two men met in Paris in 1257. A decade later, Bacon became the first European to record a formula for gunpowder. Some have speculated that Rubruck might have shared this knowledge with Bacon during their meeting. However, given that Rubruck never mentions gunpowder in his surviving writings, this theory remains speculative at best. That concludes our exploration of three of the earliest European journeys to the Mongol Empire. Missions far less renowned than the later travels of Marco Polo, yet no less significant for understanding how Europe first grappled with the reality of the Mongol world. These envoys, John of Plano Carpini, Simon of St. Quentin, and William of Rubruck, provided some of the earliest detailed accounts of Mongol customs, politics, and society to reach European audiences. Their reports shaped not only medieval perceptions of the East, but also laid the foundation for Europe's evolving diplomatic and military responses to the empire of Genghis Khan's heirs. In our next episode, we will turn our attention to the reign of Mongol Khan, the fourth great Khan of the Mongol Empire. Munka's rule marked both a high point in the empire's expansion and the beginning of new internal fractures that would shape the Mongol world for decades to come. We will explore his rise to power, his sweeping reforms, his ambitious military campaigns, and how his death set in motion a bitter succession struggle that would forever alter the trajectory of the Mongol Empire. I hope you have enjoyed this episode of the History of the Mongols. If you like the content and want to continue to support the series, you could like the video, make sure you are subscribed to the YouTube channel, and leave a comment to let me know where in the world you are listening from. Thank you, and see you all next time.